Good morning. My name's Ken Hardy, and I'm here with Shelly Jamieson, who is Secretary to the Cabinet of the Ontario Government. She has extensive experience as the former President of Extended Care, then as a Deputy Minister, and then finally the Secretary of Cabinet, where she is the Chief Minister of the Deputy Ministers. And she reports directly to Premier Dalton McGuinty. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure, Ken.
I'd like to ask you some questions about leadership. You've been here 3 times in our Learning from Leaders course.
I'm learning every time.
And the students demand that you come back each time. And just tell me about what made you go into the provincial government after you'd been in extended care?
Well, you know, I'd always been interested in public service, and I'd been very interested in the comings and goings at Queen's Park. And when I concluded my 6 years at extended care, I was looking for something different, and someone suggested maybe this was my time to come and give back in public service. And I started to inquire about what the opportunities might be there, and lo and behold, there was a match, and I was actually hired as the Deputy Minister of Transportation.
Oh, that was great. Now, what did you find about leadership as practiced in the Ontario government as opposed to the private sector?
So a couple things. You know, there are good and bad leaders both in the private sector and the public sector. No one sector has a corner on excellence, I would say. And the other thing, though, I would say specific to the public sector is sometimes there's confusion amongst civil servants about who can be the leaders. So the ministers and the premier aren't necessarily the leaders of the public service. They're actually the leaders of the province. And it was about, when I first got there, giving permission to lead. So there are leaders all the way through our 68,000 person organization, but they were waiting to be given permission to be leaders.
What attributes does it take for them and you to be leaders in a governmental situation?
Well, you have to be able to influence people. I have said before, if you look over your shoulder and no one's following, you're actually not leading anybody, and that happens. So it's not enough just to have a title, and I talk a lot in our organization about leadership without title, and it's about influencing people so that people listen to you and their thoughts are influenced by what you say, and in turn their thoughts get better as a result of that. And I think people are born with an ability to do that, but it can also be developed. It's both.
Oh, that's great. Now, we talk in the course about leadership. One level is kind of coordinating details and managing, and we call that management. When we talk about real leadership, we talk about making change happen. Now, is that the distinction that you share?
Yeah, so we have lots of managers and we need them. We need people who make sure the trains are running on time and the money's accounted for and all of those things. Those things are really important. But leadership is something else. It's inspiring people to be the very best they can be. It's about having a vision and actually being able to see around corners. I like to think that I try and see around 2 corners on any issue. Look around the corner, see what might be there, and see how we're going to navigate from where we are to where we want to be.
Mm-hmm. Now, that must be fairly demanding in a provincial government setting when you've got portfolios that are set up to maximize a particular interest, and some of them overlap and compete. Mm-hmm. How do you manage that?
Well, you have to listen to everybody and make sure you've understood. We do have silos in the provincial government, but increasingly we're behaving like an enterprise. And I often ask, what's the enterprise view on this? And a good example would be we have the Ministry of Aboriginal Affairs, and I have reminded them they're not the Ministry for Aboriginal Affairs. It's the ministry where we have the greatest understanding of our Aboriginal relationships, and that ministry has to help everybody else, Ministry of Transportation, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Education, everybody, have a deeper understanding and awareness of the impact of their policies on Aboriginal peoples. Mm. But if you have a ministry that's only behaving a certain way and isn't prepared to have an enterprise-wide view, they're actually not influencing the others and not bringing people along. So we work horizontally a lot in government, although I do try and make sure that even if it's a group effort, there's only one person in charge.
You've recently gone through a major crisis in trying to rescue the auto industry. Mm. What can you tell us about that?
It was an amazing experience to be part of the team that looked at Chrysler and GM. And I don't think when we went into the exercise it ever occurred to us that the people of Ontario would be owners of those companies, part owners, on the way out the other side. But that's what the situation demanded. And we did a lot of economic analysis to try and understand what was best for Ontario's future. And then we had to go with Canada, in partnership with the federal government, to Washington to convince them that in fact this was an integrated industry and that they couldn't make decisions just by themselves, or if they did, it wasn't going to be the best for the future of the industry. They recognized that, and then the three parties, the US federal government, Canadian federal government, and Ontario, struck a deal. And what was most interesting about it from a policy perspective and decision-making perspective is the short period of time. Literally the lights were going out. There wasn't a lot of time to make, contemplate these things. You had to make decisions or events were going to overtake us. It was fascinating.
And you got participation across many levels, union participation, federal government.
In the end, it was because everyone was rowing together that there's an auto industry today.
That's amazing.
And it took everybody, labor, management, and governments, suppliers, owners of small businesses.
And you must be very pleased with the recent announcements about GM going public.
Yes,
the shares valued.
Yes, we're happy that some of our money has been returned at this point, and we'll be looking to make sure that it's not our intent to stay in the car business. This was an extraordinary measure in an extraordinary time.
Can you tell me how your leadership in government compares to leadership in the private sector, say for example in Extendicare where you were the president?
So people ask me all the time about the differences between the public and private sectors, and I find the difference is more to do with large organizations and small organizations. So Extendicare was 18,000 staff across the country. The Ontario Public Service is 68,000 staff. Frankly, being leader of both of those organizations has many similarities. IT is broken, HR takes too long, and everyone hates finance. I mean, that's pretty much how it goes wherever you work in a large organization. And you're fighting constantly bureaucracy. Right. Trying to make sure you're getting the best. So I think those. How do you get out to all those people and inspire them, or get them focused on what you want to get done? I think those are the same challenges either way. I had a board and a bottom line at Extendicare, but here we have the people of Ontario and a cabinet. So, similar pressures.
Just another board.
Pretty demanding in both instances.
If you had one piece of advice, well, maybe a few pieces of advice for young graduates coming out of university right now, what would they be?
Pay attention to your networks. I've ended up in jobs, I think, in hindsight by accident. I happened to meet somebody who spoke to somebody else about something that I might be good at. And I think I undervalued those networks, and I didn't work them as hard as I perhaps should have. And so I think it's the advice I give to my children now. Pay attention to those networks. Don't be too fussed if you don't know exactly what you want to do. There are so many different jobs out there. You couldn't possibly know what they are. But when you see something that's right in front of you, stop and look at it. Pay attention. Pay attention. Don't pass up a great opportunity because you've just never thought of it before. Stop and think about it, make an analysis, and then decide if it's what you want to do.
Those sound like great pieces of advice, and we thank you for coming here today.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it.